In this video lesson, we're going to be talking about frequency separation. This technique separates out the high frequency or detailed information, like skin texture or fabric texture, from the low frequency or tonal information of your image, like the underlying tones and colors. And this allows you to work with the tonal information without adjusting the details, or to work with the details without worrying about the tonal information. Frequency separation became popular as a way to even out skin tone because of how quick the technique was, but it's since lost its popularity due to giving a less natural result than other techniques such as dodge and burn, which addresses both the high and low frequency information together and therefore looks more realistic. I've worked in a number of places that absolutely refuse to use this technique, especially on skin, as overuse and misuse of it without a proper understanding of how the technique should be used has given it a bad name. If used well, it can be a good method to fix a specific local issue on the skin. However, it shouldn't be used to retouch all skin. It can also be very helpful when cleaning up clothes, fabrics, and dirty floors, but you need to understand well what settings to choose depending on the issue and image at hand. The technique is probably one of the most abused by beginner retouchers, and that's why most professional retouchers or retouching houses will often flat out tell you not to use it. But it is still a powerful and time-saving technique in many situations and, if used correctly, is a good technique to have in your back pocket as a pro retoucher. So to apply this technique, you duplicate your background layer twice, Command J, and then you name your top layer HF for high frequency and your bottom layer LF for low frequency. You then turn your top layer off and you blur your low layer until the details of the image are blurred. So you want that skin detail to be gone. You can use various methods of blurring for this. I personally prefer to use either dust and scratches or median, as these methods of blurring hold the edges a little better than Gaussian blur, for instance, which can make the edges bleed when you're using the technique. So I'm just going to go to Filter, Noise, and Median. And I'm just going to blur this until I can't see that skin detail anymore. And I think that's about right. So I'm going to press OK there. And obviously it depends on your image how much you need to blur it. There's no specific recipe for how much you need to blur it. There are two separate ways to deal with the high frequency layer when you're working with 8-bit or a 16-bit image. So for a 16-bit image, I'm just going to show you this first. For a 16-bit, you go to Image, Apply Image, and you make sure you have in your layer that you have your low frequency selected, and you go to Blending Mode, Add, and you go to Scale to Offset 0, Opacity 100, and Invert. You then press OK and go to Linear Light. And that'll give you the best result for a 16-bit image. To get the best result for an 8-bit image, you use your high frequency layer again and you go to Image, Apply Image, and again you've got your low layer and you want to have it on Subtract Blending Mode with a scale of 2 and an offset of 128, and you want Invert off. And then you press OK. And again, you turn it to Linear Light. You've now separated off your high frequency information from your low frequency information. And if I take these layers off, you can see that's what the high frequency information looks like. It's just the details of the image, the textures of the image. Whereas the low frequency information is the tones and colors of the image. Then if we were to group the low and high frequency layers by pressing Command and G with the layers selected, then if we were to toggle that group on and off, you can see that there's not actually any change with the frequency separation. The high frequency and low frequency layers untouched together do not actually change your image. Now, you don't want to work on these two layers as they are, because then you won't be able to roll back or mask out any areas of your work. So what you can do is you can press Command J and duplicate your high frequency layer, and you need to make sure you turn it to a normal blending mode and then clip it to your high frequency layer. You'll now be able to use this layer to work on. So I'm going to call this high frequency work. And for the low frequency layer, you can just add another blank layer in there and call it low frequency work. This is just what I name these layers, but you're welcome to name them anything that would work for you. If you're going to be working on the tonal information of the image, you can do it in a couple of ways. You can use the brush tool or the clone tool or the healing brush tool. Just make sure that the clone tool is set to current and below and that the healing brush tool is set to current and below. For working on the high frequency layer, you're going to want to make sure that your clone tool is set to current layer. When using frequency separation, it's better not to try and even out the skin tones, as there are much better methods for doing this, such as dodge and burn. But if you need to work on a specific localized area, for instance, like these lips, you can work with the low frequency information subtly and still get realistic results. So we've got our blank layer ready, and I could either use the clone tool and make sure it's set to current and below, and I could clone information. I could also use the healing tool and I could heal information. If I wanted to, I could even turn the high layer off so that I can see what I'm doing and just heal away any inconsistencies. Or I could use the brush tool on a low flow rate and I could sample and paint to smooth out any information I need to. Let's turn that back on. And you always want your results to be quite subtle with frequency separation. You never want to take it too far. So I'm just going to very subtly deal with these areas here. And as you can see, the texture of the lips needs work. So there we go. We've just evened that out. Maybe we want to brighten that a bit. We've just evened that out using the low frequency work layer. Then to work on that texture, you get your clone stamp tool and you set it to current layer. You always want it to be quite a hard brush. You don't want to soften the edges of what you're working with. And then you just work on your high frequency work layer and you sample and clone. And as you can see, this goes much quicker. You don't need to worry about that tonal information. You're just working with the high frequency information, which is why this method can sometimes be good for crosshairs and cleaning hair in general, because you don't have to worry about being too careful with the cloning. You always want to be careful, but you can get away with a little bit more than you could if you had to worry about the tonal information as well. Working on the low layer is also just a useful tip. If you work on this low frequency layer and you want to really smooth out flaws or clothing, get rid of the inconsistencies in velvet, for instance, that's a really great way to do it, is working on the low frequency layer in frequency separation. And then obviously for your creases in clothing, you would take the crease out with high frequency information and then smooth out any of the low frequency information that needs smoothing from there. You can also graft texture in frequency separation. Say we wanted to graft this information onto this side to make it more even. What we could do is we could just select this area. I'm just going to select it a bit broader than I need. And Command J to make a copy of that selection. And then again, it needs to be set to normal blending mode, so that if I set it to linear light, it would duplicate that texture and it wouldn't look good. So to set it to normal blending mode, and then Command T and flip horizontal, and you just graft it back into the place it needs to be, somewhere like there. Sorry, I'm just going to clip this first to this layer, and I'm then going to add a layer mask to it. I'm going to invert it, Command I, and I'm just going to brush the effect in where I want it. And as you can see, it's now duplicated that texture and brought it to this side. So as you can see, that's made quite a difference to the lips. You obviously want to be aware always with when you're cloning or when you're grafting information just to watch out for any repeats in patterns. You don't want to have obvious repeats in your image. And this is obviously a technique uses a lot of file space because it's duplicating the image. So if you want to make sure that you keep your file size small, you can just mask out, just very roughly, the area that you've worked on. Make selection. Let's just feather that by 2. And that's hidden the selection. And then you can Command-Shift-C and Command-Shift-V. And you can delete the frequency separation. And then all you need to do is label this layer FS Lips. And you'll have all the benefits of having used frequency separation without the added weight to your file. And that's how you use frequency separation to deal with the high frequency or detail information in your image separately from the low frequency or tonal and color information in your image. It's best used sparingly, but when used subtly, it can be a useful technique.